I've been working as a pizza delivery guy for years, and I've seen all kinds of weird stuff, but what happened that night was different. It started out as a normal delivery. The address was in a quiet area outside the city, a neighborhood with dimly lit streets and houses far apart. When I arrived, the place looked like it belonged to someone with money. The house was massive, with those garden lights that create more shadows than light. I glanced around but didn't see anyone else. The doorbell was one of those fancy ones with a soft chime, and seconds after I rang it, the door opened. Two women, twins, stood in front of me. I swear, they were like perfect copies of each other, stunningly beautiful, but their eyes had this weird way of looking straight through you. They were wearing these silky, elegant nightgowns and giggling like they already knew me. One of them made a comment about my looks that threw me off guard, and the other said something about the party finally starting. They mentioned it was a birthday celebration and insisted I come inside. I hesitated, of course. My rule is to drop off the pizza and leave, but something about them, their confidence, their magnetism, made me feel flattered, and I ended up saying yes. I took one step inside, and that's when I realized I'd made a huge mistake. The moment I entered, the atmosphere of the house hit me like a ton of bricks. The living room was spotless, like it belonged in a high-end magazine, but it felt wrong. Wine glasses, half empty, were scattered on the tables, like the party had already started, but there was no one else there. Soft instrumental music played in the background, the kind that tries to calm you but only makes you more on edge. The twins closed the door behind me and guided me to the couch, giggling and whispering to each other like they were sharing some private joke. One of them sat beside me, while the other stood there, watching me with a stare that made me want to look away. The one sitting down started asking questions. My name, if I delivered in this area often, stuff like that. Her tone was seductive, like she was trying to put me at ease, but there was something off about her smile. The other twin, still standing, said she had a special gift for me upstairs. When I saw them exchange a knowing look, my gut told me something was seriously wrong, but at the same time, I didn't want to seem rude. I mean, they were gorgeous, and part of me thought I might just be overthinking. Then, the twin standing up said she'd go prepare the surprise and slowly made her way upstairs, glancing back at me with that same unsettling smile. The one next to me practically leaned into me, holding my hand as if to reassure me. "You're going to love it, trust me," she said, gripping my hand tighter than I was comfortable with. I laughed nervously, trying to buy time, but inside, every alarm bell in my head was going off. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. Finally, she got up and motioned for me to follow her upstairs. I almost tripped as I hesitated, but she grabbed my arm, smiling like nothing was weird. I figured if I just played along, saw the surprise, and kept my cool, I could leave without any issues. At the top of the stairs, things got even stranger. There was a door slightly open, and behind it, I could see a reddish glow, like flickering neon lights. The weirdest part was the sound. This low, buzzing noise mixed with what sounded like whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but it sent a chill down my spine. As I got closer, I noticed the lights were flashing in a way that made me feel dizzy, almost hypnotized. And then I saw it. Through the crack of the door, there were hands, several small hands, gripping the edges of the doorframe. They were too small to belong to the twins. My blood ran cold. I forced myself to stay calm and muttered something about needing to grab something from my car. The twin with me tried to insist, gripping my arm harder, but I forced a smile and said I'd be back in just a minute. As I started walking downstairs, my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst. Every step echoed in the eerie silence, but then I heard it, laughter. Not normal laughter, though. It was distorted, almost inhuman, like someone trying to mimic laughter but getting it horribly wrong. I glanced back, and what I saw still haunts me. The twins were standing at the top of the stairs, but they weren't alone. Behind them was a massive man holding what looked like a chainsaw, though it wasn't running. He had the same eerie, frozen smile as them. The way they all just stood there, staring down at me, was enough to make me bolt. I didn't wait to find out what was going to happen. I ran through the living room, threw the door open, and sprinted to my car like my life depended on it, because I think it did. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped them. When I finally got the door unlocked, I jumped in, slammed it shut, and locked everything. Before I started the car, I dared to glance in the rearview mirror. They were there, both twins, standing at the top of the stairs again. This time, though, they weren't moving at all. Their bodies were completely still, like discarded mannequins, and their eyes. It felt like they were staring straight at me, even from that distance. The man was gone. No footsteps, no chainsaw, just silence. The kind that's so loud it makes your ears ring. I started the car and tore out of there without looking back. I didn't care where I was going. I just wanted to get away. Eventually, I stopped at a gas station to catch my breath, drenched in sweat. I thought about calling the cops, but what was I supposed to say? That two creepy twins and a guy with a chainsaw almost did something to me, but I had no proof. To this day, I wonder what was in that room with the red lights, and what would have happened if I'd stepped inside. One thing's for sure, I never deliver to that area anymore. And no matter how much time passes, I can't stop thinking about what I might have walked into that night. I've been working as a pizza delivery guy for a while now, and like any other night job, I've seen some strange things. One evening, I got an order for delivery at a park, a pretty remote spot that's almost always empty once it gets dark. The order had been placed by someone named Raphael, and the address was clear in the app. I thought about asking more about the place, but it was already late, and I just wanted to finish my shift. The GPS led me to an abandoned kiosk in the middle of the park, which made me feel uneasy, like I had arrived at the wrong place. But for some reason, I decided to keep going. When I parked my bike and got off to deliver the food, I saw a man sitting on a bench at the kiosk. He looked nervous, constantly fidgeting with his hands, glancing around as if he was waiting for something or someone. At that moment, my instincts told me to stay alert. He suddenly got up and came toward me, but his behavior was so uncomfortable that I froze for a few seconds. "Are you the delivery guy?" he asked, his voice louder than it should have been. Before I could answer, he quickly grabbed the food and gave me a strange smile, like he was relieved. I was about to leave as fast as I could, but at that exact moment, I heard footsteps. I turned around and saw 3 more men emerging from the trees surrounding the kiosk. They were armed with knives, and the way they approached was too quick, almost as if they'd been waiting for me. The man who had been sitting on the bench now moved closer, taking slow steps, but there was such tension in the air that I froze. One of the other men, taller with a scar on his face, locked eyes with me and said, "You're not leaving this quickly." I tried to stay calm, but my body was in full panic mode. My heart was pounding so hard I could almost hear it. "I'm just a working guy. Please don't hurt me," I said, trying to hide the fear in my voice. But it seemed like he wasn't interested in hearing me. He just gestured with his head, and the others closed in even more. That's when things got even stranger. Before I had time to react or even try to run, I heard a siren, and the whole scene changed. A man with a gun appeared out of nowhere, and the siren grew louder. The guy with the knife closest to me took a step back, and the others slowly backed off too. I wasn't sure if I was relieved or in shock, but I saw the cop advancing toward me. He didn't seem intimidated by any of those knives. I looked at the men around me, and in the blink of an eye, they started dispersing into the trees. The officer made a swift move and yelled, "Stay where you are," but no one dared to continue. I stood there, not understanding what was going on, and everything happened so fast that I couldn't process it properly. The cop seemed to know exactly what was happening. He quickly looked at me and ordered me to stay put, pointing his gun at the guys who were still trying to leave. I couldn't tell if he was angry or trying to prevent something worse, but the fact was, he seemed to have complete control over the situation. "These guys are known. You're lucky I'm here," he said without even looking at me, as he focused on the others. I was still trembling, trying to process everything that had happened, and the cop kept talking, saying this wasn't a normal robbery and I should stay quiet. But I couldn't understand how I ended up in the middle of all that. The sense of danger didn't go away. When he finally told me to leave, I didn't hesitate. My bike was right there, and I jumped on it as fast as I could, starting the engine as quickly as possible. I looked back before leaving the park, but the cop was already walking away, heading toward the men. I didn't stick around to see what happened next, but a part of me wanted to know what those men wanted from me. The only thing I knew for sure was that my delivery had ended in a way I never could have imagined. And I still don't know what exactly was at stake that night. That night, I couldn't sleep right. The faces of those men were still in my head, those suspicious looks and that tension in the air. I had no idea who they were or what they wanted, but something told me I had gotten out of there by sheer luck. I couldn't understand what happened in that deserted park. How did the cop know exactly what to do? He seemed prepared, but who were those guys walking around with knives at night in the middle of a park? And worst of all, why did they choose me? I wasn't anyone special, just a delivery guy trying to do my job. I thought about going to the station the next day, but I knew with all the tension, maybe no one would believe me, or worse, they wouldn't care. So, I let it go and tried to move on with my life. But what happened that night kept hammering in my mind. I spent the next few days looking over my shoulder, like something was watching me. I didn't want to do any more night deliveries, but I needed the money. One day, when I went back to the park during the day, I got chills just looking at the kiosk where everything went down. I stood there for a few minutes, like I was waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Ever since that day, everything felt different, like the park was charged with some strange energy that I couldn't explain. And what bothered me the most, I never found out what happened to those men. They never showed up again, and I never heard anything about that cop. To this day, I can't understand what really happened there. I never thought delivering pizzas would lead me to something like this. I always assumed it was a straightforward job. Pick it up, drop it off, and that's it. But that night, on a deserted road, I had a feeling something was off from the moment I accepted the delivery. It was a strange order, an address with no number, just a specific spot on a road outside the city. I tried to refuse it, but my boss insisted, saying it was an old customer who always tipped well. So, I went. The drive was long, and the road seemed to get more and more isolated. Trees lined both sides, with no lights or signs of civilization. My bike's headlights barely lit the way, and the weight of the silence around me was almost unbearable. When I reached the location, there was no house, just a car parked on the side of the road. It was an old model, probably from the 80s, with faded paint and no lights on. The windows were completely fogged up, and for a few seconds, I just sat there on my bike, trying to figure out if I was in the right place. Before I could do anything, the driver's side window rolled down slightly, just enough to reveal part of a man's face. He had a serious, almost blank expression. His voice was low but firm. "Leave the pizza in the back seat." My gut told me to leave, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I followed his instructions. As I got closer to the car, I noticed that the back window was fogged up too, like there were too many people inside or the air was humid. I tried not to think too much about it as I opened the door. The interior smelled strange, a mix of mold and something sweet but chemical, hard to describe. I placed the pizza box on the seat and, without thinking, glanced inside. There was no one in the back, which only made me feel more uneasy. That's when I heard it, a muffled sound, coming from the trunk. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then it came again, louder, unmistakably human. I immediately stepped back from the car, my heart racing. "Do you need anything else, sir?" I asked, trying to sound calm, but my voice wavered. He didn't respond right away. He just sat there, the window still slightly open, as if he were studying me. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, he finally spoke, short and to the point. "No, you can go now." I wanted to run, but I was frozen. My mind screamed at me to ask about the sound coming from the trunk, but my body wouldn't move. Then the window rolled up, slowly, and the car was sealed shut again. It wasn't until I heard the locks click that the adrenaline kicked in, and I was able to move. I climbed onto my bike quickly, but my hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the keys. As I tried to start the engine, the muffled sounds from the trunk replayed in my head. It was impossible to ignore. I glanced back at the car. It wasn't moving. Everything about it seemed wrong. The way it was parked, the lack of lights, the eerie silence except for those sounds, now quieter but still present. For a moment, I thought about calling the police, but what if it was all in my head? What if it was just some weird mechanical noise? Deep down, though, I knew it wasn't. That was a person. I took a deep breath and decided to act. The man had gotten out of the car. I got off my bike and walked toward the back of the car but kept my distance. "Is everything okay back there?" I shouted, my voice shaky. There was no response. I tried to peer through the gaps in the trunk, but I couldn't see anything. I started walking around the car, staying cautious, trying to make sense of what was happening. The muffled sound was still there, along with something new, a faint scratching noise, like metal being scraped. Just as I was about to back away, I heard the front window roll down again, just slightly. The man spoke without moving. "I told you to leave." At that moment, I felt a chill run down my spine like never before. I could have sworn I saw him step out of the car earlier. And his voice. It was calm but had an undertone of something unsettling, like he was holding back either anger or desperation. I took 2 steps back, trying not to show the panic that was overtaking me. Before I could turn to leave, another loud bang came from the trunk, like someone had kicked it from the inside. There was no way I could ignore it. I looked at the man, waiting for him to do something, but he just sat there, motionless, his face partially hidden in the shadow of the window. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. What if I left and later found out someone was really in danger? I pulled my phone from my pocket and started dialing the police without even thinking. As soon as I raised the phone to my ear, the driver's window rolled down completely for the first time. His face was fully visible now, and there was something deeply unsettling about the way he looked at me. His eyes were hollow yet piercing, as if he knew exactly what I was thinking. "If you call, no one will make it in time," he said. My body froze. He knew what I was doing, but I had no idea how. The call didn't go through. The signal cut out the second he finished speaking, leaving only static in my ear. That's when something even stranger happened. The car started shaking slightly, like someone or something inside the trunk was moving with more force. But the man didn't seem worried at all. He just kept staring at me with that empty gaze while I stood there, paralyzed, torn between running and figuring out what was happening. Before I could decide, he opened the driver's door and got out. He was tall and thin, but there was something about the way he moved that made me instinctively step back, like each step was deliberate, almost mechanical. He didn't say another word. He just walked to the trunk, pulled out an old key, and unlocked it. Suddenly, everything went silent. The muffled sounds stopped. The scratching stopped. He opened the trunk, and what I saw is something I still can't explain. There was no one inside, just a darkness that didn't make sense. It wasn't just empty. It was like the bottom didn't exist. It was a void, an absence of light or matter. My heart nearly stopped when he turned to me and smiled, as if inviting me to come closer. "Want to take a closer look?" he asked. I shook my head automatically, trying to convince myself this was all a nightmare. Without waiting for an answer, he tossed the pizza box into the trunk, and it disappeared instantly, like it had been swallowed. He closed the trunk calmly and walked back to the car while I stood there, frozen, trying to process what I'd just seen. The engine started, and the car began to pull away slowly. But before it left, he rolled the window down one last time. "You've done your part. Now leave." He smiled again and drove off, disappearing into the darkness of the road, leaving nothing behind but the sound of the wind and the emptiness of the roadside. I got on my bike and sped off without looking back, feeling like I just escaped something far beyond my understanding. Even now, when I think about that night, I can't stop wondering what was in that trunk. And the scariest part? A part of me feels like I left something of myself behind in there too. I've been working as a pizza delivery guy for about 3 years, and nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened to me until that night. It was a Friday, around 10:30 p.m., and I was already counting down the minutes to the end of my shift. Then the phone at the pizzeria rang, and we got a strange order. The address was at a dock in a deserted area of the city. I even asked my boss if we were sure about delivering there because, let's face it, no one orders pizza to a dock at night. He just shrugged and said, "If they pay, we deliver." So I grabbed the pizza, got on my bike, and headed out. On the way, it was just me and the wind. The streets were empty, and the closer I got, the stronger the feeling that I was being watched. But I needed the money, so I kept going. I got to the dock about 20 minutes later. It was so quiet that all I could hear was the water lapping against the pillars and the distant sound of crickets. Strangely, there was no one around. No cars, nothing. That's when I saw the boat. It wasn't very big, but it didn't look like one of those fancy yachts either. It was anchored, with a dim light on the mast. I stood there for a few seconds, wondering if I should wait for someone to show up, but then my phone buzzed with a message from the customer. Leave the pizza on the deck and leave. The money is under the wooden hatch near the stairs. It felt weird, but I did as they asked. I stepped onto the boat and immediately noticed a strange smell I couldn't place at first. When I went to put the pizza down on the deck, I saw some dark stains on the floor. Without thinking, I touched one, and when I looked at my hand, it was blood. My heart started racing. I froze, trying to come up with a logical explanation. It could have been anything, right? Maybe someone cleaned a big fish or something? But the stain looked fresh, still glistening under the dim mast light, like it had been made just minutes ago. Then, I heard a muffled sound coming from below deck, like people talking. There were voices, more than one, but they were too low for me to make out what they were saying. That was all I needed to get my nerves on edge. I backed away and took a step to get off the boat, but before I could leave, the weak lights started flickering, and something in the shadows near the stairs leading below moved. I can't even describe what I saw. It was like a shadow, but it had a shape, and it moved in a strange, shaky way. My body froze for a second, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Then I heard footsteps coming from below deck, getting louder, like someone or something was coming up. I didn't think twice. I jumped off the boat, barely judging the distance to the dock, and almost twisted my ankle when I landed. All I wanted was to start my bike and get the hell out of there, but my hands were shaking so much I couldn't even get the engine going. I could barely manage to start the bike because of how nervous I was. The engine sputtered, and every second felt like whatever was behind me was going to catch me. Finally, when it started, I gunned it and didn't look back until I reached the curve. I couldn't help myself. I had to see. And what I saw made my heart stop. A shadow, standing at the edge of the dock, watching me. I didn't stay to look any longer. My vision was blurry from the fear, and all I could hear was my heartbeat pounding in my ears. When I got home, I was still shaking. I tried telling a friend what happened, but he just laughed it off, saying I was imagining things, or that it was probably some kind of prank. But I was still so freaked out that I decided to go back to the dock the next day to try to figure out what happened. I tried to convince the pizzeria to let me go, but my boss just gave me a weird look, like I'd lost my mind. So in the end, I went alone. I got there early during the day, before the sun could start setting, and the dock was even quieter than the night before. The moment I arrived, I felt uneasy. Everything seemed even stranger in daylight, like something had shifted overnight. The boat was still there, anchored, but now it looked empty and abandoned. I walked toward it, heart pounding, and inspected every corner. There was no more blood on the deck, but the stains were still faintly visible, like time had worn them down. The mast light was off, and the water calmly lapped against the hull in a way that somehow made everything feel more unsettling. I almost didn't want to check below deck, but I knew I had to. When I lifted the wooden hatch near the stairs, the money was there, just like the customer had said. But something felt different. There were no marks or signs of what had happened the night before. I don't know what went down that night, but after that, I never went back to that dock again. I couldn't track down the customer who placed the order, and the pizzeria never got another delivery for that address. People started saying the place was cursed, that no one should go there after 10 p.m., but I still don't know what really happened. All I know is that the things I saw, heard, and felt that night weren't normal. Whatever it wasn't something that belonged at a simple, deserted dock.